So you followed the news on President Ghani proposing transfer of power to an election in 6 months. What's your thoughts about this proposal? Do you think U.S. will accept it?
Well, I'm not sure. Maybe, probably. I can't speak for the administration. I think anything we can do to create a better security and political environment is good. I think one of the biggest important messages to keep in mind is that the United States shows its commitment to a democratic Afghanistan, to a secure Afghanistan, and we'll continue to hopefully do that. I have a good feeling that the administration is going to maintain our commitment there. NATO will maintain their commitment there, and we can continue to have real progress. That's my hope.
So NATO and allies are working with the U.S. for a responsible end of war and also a peace in Afghanistan. What do you think they can do to achieve their goal?
So I think it's important for both NATO and the United States to make it clear that, this is the outcome we expect. We will, stay and embolden the Afghan government as long as it takes to compel, if we want to get the Taliban to the table, to compel them to actually follow through with the peace agreement to end the attacks. And I think should be no, misunderstanding. The U.S. and NATO don't want to stay in Afghanistan forever, but we also are not going to leave and have it fall apart to where it was prior to 9/11. And so I think, understanding that negotiations are always good, they're always important, but doing it from a position of strength is how we can get to an outcome that's verifiable. And I think also, maintaining a presence that if the agreement is violated, the U.S. can continue to fight against the Taliban when needed.
Washington is also seeking regional support to push for the peace process, also the troops withdrawal. Is it the right path to go and move on with the May 1st troops withdrawal deadline?
No, I don't think it's good to move forward. I think putting any kind of a deadline out there, if you do that, an agreement has to be completely followed. The Taliban have not lived up to their end of the agreement. They continue, of course, to attack the Afghan government, the Afghan military. So I think it's important for us to move that date and to make it clear that not until all aspects of the agreement are met, we will continue to stand with the people of Afghanistan. They've made it clear, particularly even if you look at the younger generations, that they want the U.S. and NATO to stay as long as it takes, and we should be willing to do that. This is not for the United States and NATO an ongoing intensive war. It's more of a peacekeeping and building operation, and to leave now would be basically to snatch defeat from potentially the jaws of victory.
So on other issue like foreign policy, how do you assess Biden's foreign policy and how U.S. should align its policy with President Ghani demands at the same time reaching a peace deal and also troops withdrawal is on the table?
Yeah, so I think, look, the Biden foreign policy has been, slightly different from Trump in terms of rebuilding our alliances, looking at the importance of having allies. And I hope they're very clear. So I very strongly disagreed with President Trump just on his discussion about leaving Afghanistan. And I hope that the Biden administration comes out and says, we will continue to negotiate, we'll continue to bring people to the table, but we're not leaving until these aspects of the agreement are met. And so I think there's a lot that's still to be judged, but I think we can kind of walk and chew gum at the same time, is bring all these interests together and get a real peace deal. I don't think the Taliban want to keep fighting forever. We don't want to keep fighting forever. But look, the only way the United States can be defeated is if we choose to be defeated, and we won't lose on the battlefield.
Yeah. So what is your immediate fear if the troops withdrawal happen by May 1st and there's the level of the troops goes down to zero and still there are Americans in ground? What's the risk for them?
Yeah, I think, there's risk to anybody in Afghanistan, to any Americans left over. Obviously, they'd be a target of terrorists and the Taliban. And I also think there'd be real risk of, chance of collapse of Afghanistan. Look, we know that, the government's delicate. We know that it takes a while to build democracy. We know that the Afghan military is still heroically fighting the Taliban and terrorist elements every day. And the importance of having those troops there is to just give them the logistical backing, the moral backing that's necessary, as well as the technology we bring. So I think there is immediate risk if we pull out of a collapse of, frankly, the many, many decades that both the Afghan people, Americans, and NATO members work to achieve.
There's plenty of criticism of the deadline, and I was just listening to an event with foreign policy with Congressman Adam Smith. He said there's a May 1st is not ideal for logistics purposes, also because there are so many American equipment they don't want to leave behind. It's not ideal. So, do you think with all these advices, President Biden will consider an extension of troops stay?
Well, that's my hope, and that's my expectation, is that we do stay at this level. And I've been told by leaders that with 2,500 American troops, we can continue to project combat power where needed. We can continue to protect ourselves, and we can continue to strengthen our Afghan allies. So I do expect that will extend. I think the key is to understand that the American people, with the exception of a few politicians who use it for political reasons, they're not begging to leave Afghanistan. We'd rather be out of there, but we also understand, because most Americans lived through it, the real cost of returning to a pre-9/11 Afghanistan. And I think the important message to get out is that the people of Afghanistan do not see the U.S. and NATO as occupiers. They actually see them as partners and friends.
There's also bipartisan support for this. So how important it is, a bipartisan support in the Congress for veterans' background, that they are also advising on a similar topic. And a lot of folks are against the May 1st withdrawal. What's your thoughts about how it can contribute with the decision President Biden will make?
I do think it's important that there is bipartisan support to stay around. Nobody wants to be there indefinitely, but we will be there based on situation on the ground. And it's important to show in the time when Republicans and Democrats can't agree on much, that there's a lot that agree on this. I think that'll give President Biden the strength to make that decision, to show that Congress will be here to continue to fund and support that mission. And I expect that deadline to move.
Also, you have served in Iraq and Afghanistan. Do you think if, let's say, things move on, an experience like Iraq will happen to Afghanistan? Some, like Afghanistan study group, suggested that there will be another outbreak of civil war in Afghanistan.
Well, I certainly think that if we just leave and then all of a sudden it's, you're there without NATO and U.S. participation, there's a real risk of a civil war. There's certainly a real risk of Taliban advancements and takeover of the government. And there's a risk of, again, having an ungoverned area where a terrorist group can thrive. And ungoverned territory and territory unchallenged by a terrorist group is what they desire. It gives them the space to plan and train and equip. So I do think there's real risk. That's why I think that's a decision that's not going to be taken.
In the regional countries like Pakistan, do you think it can influence the outcome of the peace process? Because it's still, according to the reports, the Taliban didn't really totally stay away or cut ties with other terrorist groups. And according to experts, there is still this Quetta Shura and other Shuras, which is still there, like working with the Taliban.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite obvious to us that, the Taliban still have relationships with terrorist groups. Governments still have a relationship with the Taliban. I mean, a lot of this stems, as you well know, from a mistrust between India and Pakistan and this idea of keeping people on their heels. Well, look, those days are over. It's time to move on. It's time to call the Taliban what they are, which is a brutal organization that has no place in a free and a fair Afghanistan, but they have a place to participate maybe in democracy like anybody does, but they can't do that by force. And so any place that any of that pressure can be leveraged is good. Nobody wants to see this go on forever. And we certainly don't want to see, for instance, the Chinese come in and take advantage of Afghanistan's mineral wealth, for instance, to enrich themselves.